Are we set to go here?
Yes, good morning, everyone. We have 75 people on the call.
Greetings, fellow township officers. My name is Mel Millender, and I represent District 12 on the Minnesota Association of Townships Board of Directors. On behalf of our association, I welcome you to these virtual 2021 spring education courses. Before we continue, I'd ask you to stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. At this time, Kristen will stop the screen sharing. We realize that this pandemic has been stressful for you in conducting your township duties, and we hope these presentations will assist you in providing services to your communities. MAT is still operational, and we are here to assist you in any way we can. Should you have any questions over anything presented in these courses or any township issues, please let us know. You can use your chat for questions during the presentation, and Kristen actually told us we'll use our question and answer. So please pay attention to that, and we'll get your questions answered. Today's presentations are for supervisors, day 2, which includes 4 classes. Materials were previously emailed to our registrants and our meeting host. Actually, Kristen Anderson is our host today. Leslie's not with us. We will also put in a link to them in the chat box. They are also on the MAT website near each class registration link. Today's presentation and presentations on other days are being recorded, so you and other township officers not able to attend can view the recorded sessions. A link for these recorded sessions will be on our website. Some courses are offered live 2 times because Matt realizes that township officers are still engaged within their communities. Therefore, we wanted to provide more than one opportunity to participate. We have presentations for supervisors, new township officers, and clerk and treasurers on different dates, so you can attend one or all. A note about virtual class participation. We are using a Zoom webinar format, which allows the presenters to see the names of the participants and our meeting hosts to unmute people as needed. If you have a question, please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen, and the presenters will see that and respond. Matt is excited to have Jeff Kruger join Matt as our new executive director. Jeff is a supervisor in Newmarket Township, south of the Twin Cities. He joins us with experience as a small business owner. He has been active in MAT training and legislative events. He joins us on March 29th, that's yesterday. So today is his second day on the job. Again, thank you for attending, and now I'll turn things over to our presenters.
And I have one more note about housekeeping. So we have 5 people who have dialed in on the phone. Good morning to the phone folks. If you have a question, you're going to press *9, and then I will see that on my screen. So if you press *9 on the phone, then that will raise your hand and we will be able to hear your question. It'll just take a couple moments to unmute you, but then that's *9 for the people on the phone if you have a question. So Amy or Mel, did you have anything else?
I do not. It's all yours, and I'm just going to watch for a while here.
All right, is that showing up okay?
Yep, I can see it.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here today to talk about noxious weeds. My name is Aimee Duchene. I am the County Ag Inspector for East Ottertail. Ottertail County is quite large. We have about 62 townships. There's a east and a west, just to break it down. So I assist 31 townships with our noxious weed law. This is going to be my 10th season working with this program. And let's see, in 2019, I was the president of the Minnesota Association of County Ag Inspectors. And today we're just going to go over a very brief overview of the Minnesota noxious weed law, kind of go over some commonly asked questions, do a little bit of plant ID work, and I'll leave some time at the end for any questions you guys might have. So we'll hop in and get started. There we go. So when I was coming up with this presentation, there's so many different categories and committees and things that go along with the noxious weed law. It's a very, I would say, active law. We have our noxious weed advisory committee that reviews all of the weeds on the list on a rotating basis every 3 years. We have the Commissioner of Agriculture that's involved. We have our seed unit, our biocontrol unit, and it's a rabbit hole of things that are all dealing with this law. So rather than trying to cover everything in an hour or 45 minutes, I just am going to focus on the things that I think townships need to know. So we're going to spend a lot of time on the controlled list and kind of how the law came about, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on the eradicate list or the restricted list. We're just going to try to focus on things that you guys as townships are going to want to know. So our Minnesota noxious weed law was formed in the late 1800s. Oddly enough, it was originally called the Canada Thistle Law, which was started in 1872. So that right away shows you that we've been battling Canada thistle for over 150 years, and it's still an ongoing battle today. It references Minnesota statutes 18.76 or 18.91. The main purpose of the law being that residents of the state be protected from the injurious effects of noxious weeds on public health, the environment, public roads, crops, livestock, or other property. And the one thing I do like about working with the noxious weed law is we always reference the statute. If we have questions about how things should be enforced, we look at what the law says. So what does the law say? It says that essentially a person owning land, a person occupying land, or a person responsible for the maintenance of public land shall control or eradicate all noxious weeds on the land at a time and in a manner ordered by an inspector or county designated employee. So in short, for townships, landowners are expected to control, whether it be mechanical, chemical, or biological, any species on the controlled list. If they are controlling, then they are in compliance. So we get this question a lot too. So what's the big deal? I mean, why are these plants so horrible that they had to make a law about it? Well, noxious weeds are problematic because they are highly adaptable to disturbed areas, are able to spread at alarming rates. They can cause economic damage and outcompete native vegetation that is important to our unique landscapes throughout Minnesota. Noxious weeds can also create problems with soil erosion, diminish forage productions on lands used by domestic and wild animals, and they can impact the public in many negative ways. So they have to cause some sort of harm to public health, economics, forage, something like that. So what makes noxious weeds so obnoxious? It's a running joke that we have. So the main difference between a common weed and a noxious weed is that a noxious weed has an enormous capacity for destruction and are very difficult to control. They can displace other weeds very quickly, our common weeds. So because we are talking about weeds, we have to briefly go over a little bit of plant biology. You kind of got to know your enemy. So we have annuals. Annuals complete their life cycle in one season. The first year, or I'm sorry, in 1 year, they are going to germinate from seed. They're going to grow up. They are going to go to seed, and then they're going to die. So Palmer amaranth is a good example of an annual. They mainly spread by seed. Then we have our biennials that complete their growing or their life cycle in 2 growing seasons. So the first year they're going to germinate. They're just going to be a rosette, which is that cluster of leaves on the ground in a circle formation. Then the second year they are going to bolt up and flower. And let's see, spotted knapweed is a good example of a biennial. Then we have our perennials that live 3 or more years. Usually those first 1 or 2 years, they're just a rosette on the ground. And then the second or third year, they'll bolt up and flower. I believe plumeless thistle is a perennial. So with our noxious weed law, we have 29 state prohibited noxious weeds. We have 15 state restricted noxious weeds, and we have 4 specially regulated plants. So you can see we have a couple of different categories that we work with. For you guys, we're just going to focus on that control list. And this list does change from year to year just because of that review process. Sometimes species are removed. That makes us pretty excited. Other years, some are added. So it's a dynamic list. So we're going to hop into our prohibited category. So prohibited noxious weeds are annuals, biennials, and perennials that the Commissioner of Agriculture has deemed to have the potential or known to be detrimental to human or animal health, the environment, public roads, crops, livestock, or other property, like we discussed about before. There are 2 categories under the prohibited list, which is our eradicate list. And plants on this list are either in Minnesota in very small populations or not in Minnesota yet, but they're deemed a big enough threat where they are on this list. So if they do come in, we'll have the resources to go after it. Then we have our controlled list, and these are the species that we deal with every growing season. It's our thistles, our leaf spurge, spotted knapweed, common tansy, wild parsnip, those species. And species on the controlled list means that you need to put in an effort to prevent seed maturation and dispersal of plants into new areas. So you need to control the infestation from getting larger. This is our eradicate list. You can see there's several knapweeds on there. Let's see, some star thistle, Palmer amaranth is on there. Most recently, we had Japanese honeysuckle added to the list in 2020. And with the only ones that were really going, oh, never mind. Here are some photos of the eradicate species. Several of these are located more towards the metro area, or in southern Minnesota. Dalmatian toadflax, that's actually up in northwestern Minnesota. There's a brown knapweed, meadow knapweed. Giant hogweed is not in Minnesota yet. We'll go over that later. Poison hemlock got added to the list a couple of years ago. Palmer amaranth. And the one species we are going to go over is Palmer amaranth. This was introduced to Minnesota, I want to say in 2016, I believe, and it was through a conservation seed mix that came from the southern US. And I'm sorry, and it is an annual, destructive to row crops. It's a pigweed, and the bummer is all pigweeds look the same when they're only about that big. Once Palmer amaranth gets larger, the easiest way to identify it is if you fold the petiole, which is that little stem that connects the leaf to the main stem. If you fold that over the leaf itself, the stem is larger than the leaf, kind of in that middle right photo. That's one great way to identify Palmer amaranth. It first showed up kind of in, I believe it was Yellow Medicine County, Lyons County, Todd County had some. And the MBA's main plan of attack was to put fire on these guys. So they got a bunch of volunteers with backpack torches and they blasted the plant, then the surrounding area to get rid of the seed as well. They monitored these sites. It was 69 different sites for 3 years. And in those 3 years after treatment, they did not see any more Palmer amaranth. So they deemed it eradicated in those sites. So they'll still, they're still going to monitor it, but it's only going to be on like every couple of years, I believe, not a yearly basis anymore. So that's great news. There is still one infestation down in southern Minnesota. I don't remember exactly where, but they do have a pretty large population of Palmer amaranth. They tried the fire and it doesn't have the same effect because they think it's been there for years and years and years and years and years. So that seed bank is pretty well built up, but they are working with the landowner to control that. Oops. So this is our controlled list. These are the species that we deal with every summer. You can see Canada thistle was first added to the list in 1872. And then it was a little over 100 years until our next species was added, which was Plymouth thistle. And then most recently, Bohemian knotweed got added to the list in 2020. So purple loosestrife likes a wetter soil. It's common to find it along wetlands or swamps, ditches, lakes, rivers, that sort of thing. It's a perennial that kind of forms a bush formation. It has 5 purple petals on it, and the petals are always wrinkled. That's one of the best ways to tell it apart. It does have a native lookalike called fireweed. Fireweed is native. It's a good plant. It does like more acidic soils, so it's more common when where you're gonna see pine trees. I know, like kind of in the north part of Wadena County, you can see it there. Otherwise, over in northeastern Minnesota, you can find it there as well. Fireweed has 4 purple petals, where purple loosestrife has 5 wrinkled petals. That's one of the easiest ways to identify it. Then we have our spotted knapweed. This is a biennial. It can grow 3 to 5 feet tall. It usually blooms, usually we see it around July through August. And when I say bloom, I mean up here in Otter County. It probably blooms a little bit earlier down in southern Minnesota, but that's typically what we see up here. It's called spotted knapweed because of the bracts below the purple flower there. The tips of the bracts are brown, which give it a spotted appearance, hence spotted knapweed. The leaves are kind of silvery green and the stems are almost woody sometimes. It is a biennial, so if you find a small patch of it, you can actually get ahead of it just by hand pulling. I grew up near Little Falls and we have a family farm out there. And one year they did something with the gravel road that introduced some spotted knapweed along just a corner of the roadside. And we went and pulled out probably 30 of these little spotted knapweed plants. And every year we keep coming back around 4th of July because that's when my family gets together for holiday. And last year, I think we pulled out maybe 2 plants. So if you have a small infestation, you can get ahead of it just by pulling it. Then it does have a native lookalike called wild bergamot. Bergamot is native. It's a good plant. It has a square stem. It's part of the mint family. And if you crush the leaf, it kind of smells like a minty tea almost. You can see there's a large difference in the flower shape and the leaves. But if you were trying to identify it from the road and you were looking into the middle of a pasture or a field, you might have a hard time looking or being able to figure out the difference. We have leafy spurge. This is one of our early bloomers, typically blooming mid to late May through the end of June. Just kind of depends on when our spring season starts. The easiest way to identify leafy spurge is if you break the stem, a white milky latex sap is going to come out, and that's 100% every time. Easiest way to identify leafy spurge. Then we have wild parsnip. It's a biennial, usually blooms July through August. It can get quite tall. Here it says 3 to 5 feet tall, but I'm pretty sure I've seen it 6 feet tall or higher. The biggest obvious thing with wild parsnip is if you break the stem or the leaf and get the sap on yourself, on your skin, it will cause a blister. It's not like poison ivy where some people react and other people don't. Typically, everyone who gets the sap on them will get a blister of some sorts. And some people say it looks like a dill, which, yeah, the flower head does, but the leaf is considerably different. And then other people say it looks like golden Alexander. Golden Alexander is a native flower, so it's a good flower. However, it does look incredibly similar to wild parsnip, but if you look at the leaf, it's much different. Golden Alexander has that little stem that attaches the leaf to the main stem, kind of the third set of leaves down, you can see that. Whereas wild parsnip, the leaves connect directly to the main stem. In fact, they clasp it, so it goes a little bit around the stem. Wild parsnip has a large rigid stalk to it, where golden Alexander has a more slender, flexible stalk. If you brush up against wild parsnip, chances are you're not going to react to it. You literally need to break it and get that sap on your skin. And then as long as we're talking about parsnip, this gets brought up too at some of my weed inspector meetings. Cow parsnip and giant hogweed. Giant hogweed is on Minnesota's eradicate list. However, it is not in Minnesota as of now. It's deemed a large enough threat where it is on the list in case it does show up someday, then we can go after it. But giant hogweed is literally ginormous. It can grow 10 to 20 feet tall. The leaves itself can be 5 feet in diameter, and the flowers can be 2 to 3 feet in diameter. So this thing is a beast. It's ginormous. Whereas our cow parsnip is native to Minnesota, so it's a good plant. It can be 3 to 10 feet tall. The leaves can be 3 feet, or yeah, usually 2 to 3 feet in diameter, and the flowers are much smaller. Cow parsnip is common along ditches and trails, so that gets brought up about every year too. I get a couple of calls, but I'd rather have people call than I guess just look at it and walk away. So next we have common tansy. This is a weed that blooms typically July through August. It's a perennial. It can be 2 to 5 feet tall. It does have fern-like leaves on it, and the flowers are like a yellow button. The easiest way to identify common tansy is if you crush the leaf or the stem, it's going to be highly fragrant. It almost smells like a really strong bad perfume. I know a couple of guys have said that when they're out mowing this stuff, you can definitely tell that you're mowing common tansy because of the smell. It's really common in the northeastern part of Minnesota. Some people think it's a really pretty flower, and without knowing any better, they'll dig it up and try to plant it in their yard. So those are kind of situations we need to watch out for. Some people say it looks like goldenrod, which it can from a distance, but if you're able to get up close, you'll definitely know the difference, especially by looking at that leaf. Next, we have Canada thistle. This is a perennial. It can be 2 to 5 feet tall, and it has light pink flowers on it. Typically, this seems like it blooms July through August or September. You guys kind of know how thistles are. Once you mow it once, it seems like it sprouts 5 more. So with Canada thistle, it does not have any spines on the stem. So no thorns on the spine, which makes it different than plumeless thistle. Plumeless thistle has spines and thorns all over the place. So if you're out in the field and you see a really nasty looking thistle, it's probably going to be this guy, plumeless thistle. He blooms the same time as Canada thistle, usually late June through end of August, 2 to 7 feet tall. And you're probably going to need to do or cut it multiple times in order to get good control of it. Next, we have our common reedgrass. I've always called this Phragmites. So there is a non-native Phragmites, an invasive kind, and then a native Phragmites. The invasive kind has a very thick seed head, whereas the native has a more scraggly looking seed head. The non-native, the invasive species, has dark green leaves, and the native has more of a light green leaf. I'm gonna be honest with you, I have been trying to tell the difference between these guys for the past couple, I'd say for the past month, as I've been driving around our county. And I have a really hard time telling the difference, especially right now when everything's kind of brown and dormant. So I guess it's pretty hard to tell apart. It's really patchy in Minnesota right now. So to be honest, I would rather have my townships worry about wild parsnip and common tansy than try to figure out where the invasive common reed grass is. And we have a couple knotweeds on the list. We have giant knotweed, Japanese knotweed, and Bohemian knotweed. Funny enough, Bohemian knotweed is a hybrid production of giant knotweed and Japanese knotweed. They have hollow bamboo-like stems that can form really dense thickets. Their stems turn kind of red in the fall, and you can see that throughout the winter. You can see in the top photo, they can be very aggressive with large leaves and kind of a white cluster flower formation. Then we have common barberry. This is an ornamental that got away. When it gets into wooded areas, it can become very thick. It does have spines on the stems and a purple grape-like berry on it. We have narrow leaf bittercress. I'm gonna be honest, I have not seen this plant before. I don't think it's in Otter County. However, it can be an annual or a biennial. I think it just depends on male versus female plants. It's commonly found in forested floodplains and along rivers and streams, so it can handle a little bit of that shade. So this is our list of restricted noxious weeds. Plants on this list, this category may not be sold, transported legally, or intentionally planted in Minnesota. So you can see our buckthorns are on here, garlic mustard. We have a couple of different honeysuckles, crown vetch, Queen Anne's lace, Siberian pea shrub that was just added last year. So like we can't intentionally plant buckthorns anymore. We can't intentionally plant Siberian pea shrubs anymore. I know many years ago, these sorts of shrubs were included in some of these windbreak projects that some of our federal programs were putting on. So here we have common buckthorn. The easiest way to identify buckthorn is after all the other trees have dropped their leaves, buckthorn will still be green. So if you're out in your deer stand, that's one good time to try to look for it. With common buckthorn, the branches have spines on them, whereas glossy buckthorn does not have spines. So common buckthorn has spines, glossy buckthorn does not have spines. That's one way to tell them apart if you were really interested in getting that specific with your buckthorn. Each species of buckthorn has berries on it. They'll start off as red and then they'll turn to a dark blue or a purple. And the birds are really attracted to the berries, but the berries acts as a laxative towards the birds. And so that's one way that buckthorn is spread. Usually with buckthorn infestations, there is always a mother tree, we call it. One tree that is larger than the rest of them. And if you're really kind of looking to take down an infestation, you're going to want to cut down those mother trees first and then go after the smaller guys. If you just cut it, chances are it will resprout. So you're going to want to spray that cut stump with some sort of herbicide, typically Roundup or Garlon. I know that's a question we get a lot. Then we have our specially regulated plant list. Plants that are on this list or category may be native species, but have demonstrated some sort of harm in non-controlled environments. Or they are not native, but when they're in an environment that's not controlled, they can spread rapidly. So we have poison ivy, which is native. We'll get into that later. Then we have our Amur maple and our Norway maple and the winged burning bush. So these are all species that are non-native to Minnesota, and they're fine to plant as long as it's in an area that's going to be mowed. So like the middle of your yard or your lawn, perfectly fine. If it's going to be on the edge of a woodland, that's not okay, because that woodland isn't being controlled. Or, it's not being mowed. So many years ago, when the DNR was growing some of these species, especially the amber maple, up in their nurseries, I know like up by what's called Bedora, they have their nursery there, and across the road they have kind of a forested area. If you go out to that area, you can find these little amber maples that are shooting up in the forested area that they are now working on controlling. So like I said, find a plant in a lawn setting where it's going to be mowed regularly. Not okay to plant next to a forested area or an area that's not being mowed. So poison ivy, this is a native perennial. It can be 1 to 3 feet tall. Sometimes it can be a climbing vine. I know kind of in different parts of the country, it can take on different forms. Typically from what I've seen in Minnesota, it has a woody stem, and it produces berries on it that hang on all winter long. The leaves themselves are typically glossy with the oil on it, and they usually turn red in the fall, about the same time that the sumac leaves turn red. It can cause a rash upon contact, whether you're touching just the leaf or the stem or the root, or sometimes when it's burned, if you inhale the smoke, that can irritate your lungs. And not everyone is allergic to poison ivy, but some people are very allergic to it, where if they can break out in really bad rashes and end up going to the hospital, get a steroid shot, that sort of thing. I'm sure just about everyone knows someone, or maybe you are that someone that is that sensitive to it. Let's see. Since it does have that woody stem, sometimes people can misidentify it for a tree itself. Most of my job is actually doing lakeshore restoration. We were out at a project site near Wall Lake, and the landowner, she had placed some fencing around some trees that she wanted to protect from the deer coming to eat them off. And we were out there just kind of doing some prep work, and we kind of look over and we noticed that one of the plants in her little fenced off area is actually just a really large poison ivy plant. So we had to educate her on the difference between, the little tree she was protecting and the poison ivy plant that she also had fenced off. So she felt pretty silly, but it's always good to have that kind of educational opportunity for these guys. So weed management basics. This is just a reminder that there is a weed for every season, like we talked about, middle of May through end of August into September. And then, don't get so focused on, trying to get rid of your thistle that you may not notice the common tansy or wild parsnip just a couple of miles down the road. So also, everybody has weeds. I am the county weed inspector for East Ottertail County, and on our property we have plumas thistle, Canada thistle, common tansy, and spotted knapweed. However, we work on managing them. Our common tansy, we sprayed with Escort, and that took care of it really well. We were very impressed. We have a little patch of spotted knapweed that we pull out every year in one of our pastures. And then we have, plumas and Canada thistle in our pastures that we mow, and then we take steps to improve the pasture conditions as well, because ultimately it all comes down to plant competition. So ways that we can control our weeds include herbicides. If you have questions about herbicides, you can usually go to your co-op. They'll have some good resources. If you can buy it over the counter, then you can legally spray it. Some of the herbicides you need a license to spray, and the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has more information on that. We have mechanical, so this can be mowing, disking, chopping. Some people like to get a machete out there and chop down their thistles, or hand pull, shovel, whatever tools you have available to you. Prescribed fire is a wonderful tool for controlling weeds if you have kind of the area and the means to do so. Some of these plants, their seed is viable for probably 7 to 10 years. So if you can get a good hot fire on it, it will set back those weeds, especially if you do it in the spring. Then we have biological control for our leafy spurge in the form of flea beetles. We have the black flea beetle and the brown flea beetle. And these are great for organic producers or absentee landowners, or if you have an area that's kind of difficult to get any equipment out to or herbicide. But with these guys, it's really important to know that they are never going to eat themselves out of house and home. You're always going to have a little bit of leafy spurge left because that's what they eat. That's where their house is. So hopefully you can go from having like, 90% cover leafy spurge down to 10, 15% cover. And that would be great for us. With these flea beetles, they do spend most of their lives in the root of the plant. That's where they lay their eggs, and the eggs hatch or turn into larvae, and the larvae eat away at the root. Then for about 2 to 3 weeks out of the whole year, they come up to the surface of the plant, and that's where they find their mate, and they do their thing, and they go back down, and it starts all over again. So when they're up at the surface, that's when we can collect them and move them to other sites. They don't fly, but they are very good jumpers. They're about the size of a fruit fly. So if you go out to a spurge plant, you can typically see them fine with your own eyes. Then we have that caterpillar there. That is the leafy spurge hawk moth caterpillar. And caterpillars, they do turn into moths and fly away. So the MDA does not release them anymore, just due to that fact. But they are still around. So we just kind of get really excited when we see these guys out on infestation. They can typically be, I don't know, I would say 3 to 5 inches long, and they can be red, orange, or yellow. And when you find these on a spurge plant, they are just chomping away at it. It's pretty neat to watch them for a little bit because they will demolish a spurge plant within minutes. They are not the nicest critters, I can tell you that. We had a staff member pick one up, and it actually turned around on him and tried to bite him. So quickly put him back on the spurge plant. So if you see them, just leave them be. I wouldn't try to pet them or take them home or anything like that. And then we have our biocontrol for spotted knapweed. We have the root weevil and we have the seed head weevil. Very similar to the flea beetles. The weevils spend most of their lives in the roots of the plant. They only come up to the surface for a couple of weeks out of the year, usually in August when it gets really hot. Both of these species, they don't really like wind or clouds or rain. So the best time to go and try to find these guys on those hot, dry, calm days. Some seasons we get plenty of those. Other seasons we might get one day. So it's pretty time and weather sensitive. So the seed head weevil, when it's up on the above ground part of the plant, it will actually eat the seeds of the plant, or it'll actually eat the seeds out of the flower itself. The root weevil likes to stay towards the base of the plant and attack it that way. I guess, and just a note about biocontrol, we can typically get these guys from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. The contact would be Monica Chandler for that. Otherwise, there's some counties and some parts of the states where they have large enough sites that you can go and collect them directly from the site. Personally, that's the route that I prefer because I know that these critters can handle our winters when it can get down to, negative 36 degrees up here. So I try to keep it as local as possible. So in short, what does the law say? It says that landowners are expected to control, whether it be chemical, mechanical, or biological, any species on the control list. If they are controlling, then they are in compliance. So this is the enforcement procedure that we have set up for Ottertail County, and I would say that it works pretty well. So our first step is we try to establish voluntary compliance through friendly, respectful landowner contact. And we have our townships doing that first contact because they know more about the locals than I do, to be honest. They know if Joe is going to be hitting that field every third week in July, whereas I have no idea. So you guys have that insider knowledge that I don't have. But then after one notice, and if that can be phone call, it can be a letter, it can be a site visit, whatever you guys are comfortable with, just document it somehow. I know some townships will say that they're not comfortable sending their neighbor a letter from them. And in those situations, I usually suggest, well, put everybody's name on the township board on it, so it's not coming just from you. But anyways, after one notice you're not getting cooperation, you can contact your county ag inspector, which would be myself for East Ottertail. Or if you don't have an active county ag inspector, you can contact Emily Justin with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. That's how that is set up. Usually we recommend giving them a timeline of typically 10 to 14 days, 7 to 14 days, just kind of depending on where that plant is at that time or what stage it's in. I usually like to think if I were to get a letter, let me know I had to control my weeds, how much time would I need to adjust my schedule in order to get that done. So typically when I send out my notices, I usually give them 10 to 14 days. Like I said, just kind of depending on what stage that plant is in. So if they're not, if they're not listening to you guys, and after one notice, then I can issue my Form 1, which is an individual notice to control or eradicate noxious weeds that has the MDA logo on it, and it quotes part of the statute. And with that, I usually include a map too, and I circle which area I'm looking at. So they're not just going to cut the thistles by their house or driveway. They're actually going to go out to the pasture and take care of those. Let's see, I also send that certified, so I know that they are getting it. So if the issue ends up going to court, then we have that receipt that says, yes, you did in fact get this notice. If they're not complying by then I can issue a Form 2, which provides an estimate of how much it would be for a contractor to go out there and take care of the weeds. And if we're going to get to this step, we don't make it cheap for them. We don't want it to be convenient for them. So it usually stings a little bit. And then the third form that I can fill or I can send out gives the contractor permission to go out onto the property and take care of those weeds. And the cost to control those weeds is added to their property taxes. If I am getting to this point of our enforcement process, I am already talking with our county attorney to make sure that she is on board in case it does go to court. We make sure that all of our paperwork is in order, and then we did all of the steps well enough, and it's well documented. So we have all of this kind of evidence that we have. I've only had to go through this entire process once, and it was with a foreclosed property. Most people comply after I send out that first notice. Sometimes they might do it a day or two after I give them that deadline just to try to stick it to someone. I don't know, but I don't really care, just as long as it gets done. Obviously, the biggest thing with this process is time. We're working with plants. It's not a perfect system. So, it could take an entire month to go through this process, if not longer. So if that's the case, we go through it as much as we can during the growing season. If we can't make it all the way there, then we start over, or not quite start over. I will start sending out notices in June, or as soon as that plant comes up to the surface, as soon as it germinates. So we have more time to get through that process. So we just have a brief grant update, and I throw these pictures on here because after you start getting pretty good at your plant ID and you can identify spotted knapweed 160 miles down the road, you start to see it in other places, like these nice little quotes all have knapweeds in the background, or people will post their family photos on Facebook of them out in a meadow, and you take a closer look and realize that meadow is actually more spotted knapweed. But anyways, for the past couple of years, there have been made grants available from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture for on-the-ground work for controlling weeds on the control list and on the eradicate list. So that's been used for Palmer amaranth in some counties, or common tansy. Wild parsnip is a big one. Some counties have the meadow knapweeds and brown knapweeds. It's been used for that. So that's one grant opportunity that we've had in the past. Townships can apply for these grants. They just need to work with their county ag inspector to do that. However, we just had our local district county ag inspector for the northwestern part of the county or the state. And Emily with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture said due to budget cuts, they're not anticipating any grant applications for 2022. It would be fiscal year 2022. So no grant applications this fall, which is a bummer, but hopefully we'll get kind of back on track. And that was just due to COVID. So. All right, that kind of is the big summary. I always got to say a big thank you for your guys for doing all the work that you do out there. I know it's not always fun. It's not like I do a fist pump every time I get a weed complaint, but a lot of it's just a good educational opportunity for people, and you just kind of do what you do and keep on trucking at it. And like I said, big thanks. No one could ever do this on their own, so it's definitely a teamwork effort. So that's kind of that. There's my contact information and Emily Justin with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture's contact information. Do you guys have any questions? I can pull up the chat here. I think 3. Pull this in front of me.
So yeah, I can go through these. Eric Meyer asked, does an app help locate the type of weeds like these flowers?
Yeah, I don't think it's quite an app yet. Maybe it is. I don't know. But Ed Maps, EDDMAPS. If you go on that website, you can look up where most of these noxious weeds are in Minnesota. The Minnesota Department of Agriculture has been downloading points to this map, and it's actually a grant requirement now that if you use the grant to treat infestations, that you map it on this Ed Maps. So that's a great way where you can pull up common tansy and your county and see where the infestations are.
At eddmaps.org or .com?
I want to say it's .org.
Species information reporting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Ken Burns, are the biological control insects specific to only the one plant species, or can they also attack beneficial plants?
For the biological controls, the Minnesota Department of Agriculture has studied these insects for years and years and years and years and years. And this is part of the rabbit hole that I was talking about on that first slide. There's actually a committee that has to vote upon whether these insects are cleared for use, meaning that they will only attack what they are supposed to, so that the flea beetles aren't going to attack something else, or that none of these species are going to turn into the Asian beetle problem that we have now. So everybody on this committee has to vote yes before they can be released. And they have the biocontrol for spurge. These flea beetles will only eat leaky spurge, and not the native spurge, just the leaky spurge. Then we have the weevils for the spotted knapweed, will only eat the spotted knapweed. There are some biological controls that they were working on in the past that aren't meeting the criteria. Like they were looking at some sort of caterpillar or moth for thistle, but that caterpillar doesn't just stick to Canada or Plymouth thistle. It also goes after our native thistles. So that hasn't been approved for use, I guess. And I think they were working on one for common tansy too. So it's quite the kind of undertaking that they have to go through to have, or to be approved to only, or to be approved for release to only eat that specific plant.
Is spotted knapweed toxic to human skin?
Not spotted knapweed. Some research says that it is a I'm gonna say this wrong. Carcinogen? Is that right?
Causing cancer?
Huh?
Causing cancer
Yeah.
or causing skin irritation?
Well, I know if I pick spotted knapweed bare-handed, I'll sometimes just get a couple of red bumps from it, and I don't know, it doesn't bother me too much. But some research does say that it is a carcinogenic. I'm gonna say that wrong. Anyways,
Carcinogenic. I don't know.
carcinogenic, yes. So wear gloves when pulling a large amount of it.
How do we find out who our county ag inspector is? Crow Wing County doesn't have a weed control person.
If you go on the Minnesota Department of Agriculture website, specifically the noxious weeds, they do have an entire list of all the county ag inspectors in the state. In Crow Wing County, they don't have a county ag inspector, then your go-to person is Aimee Duchene. That is how the weed program is set up. So you would go directly to the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, and her contact info is still up there.
We are a small township in central Minnesota Lakes Forest area with no farmland. We have only 15 miles of township roads. We do not have any farmers on our board that are already experts in weed ID. Could we hire a professional to conduct an inspection and give us a baseline report?
Oh, you probably could, but I would first probably reach out to your soil and water conservation district. They might have someone on staff who's pretty efficient with plant identification that might be willing to go along for a ride with you just to do a weed survey. And that would be free. So I would check them first. Otherwise, I guess personally, I use the Minnesota Wildflowers website quite often for plant identification if I need help with that. I know that MnDOT has a weed or noxious weed handbook. I think they gave it out to townships like in 2019. But that gives a really great source for identification. Otherwise, I know there are some plant ID apps out there where you can take a picture of the plant and it will tell you what it is. Gosh, I don't know the name of the app. I personally don't use it, but I think I know Tammy Ziegler from Starlight Township, she uses it, and I think I saw her name on here, so she might be able to type that in for us, what it's called.
Okay, there's a couple questions in the chat. Is there a poster we could get of this information of noxious weeds to have it displayed at the town hall? Or a book with all this information? You mentioned MnDOT has a handbook.
Yeah, MnDOT has their 2009, or MnDOT has their noxious weed handbook. And I know you can download that from their website. Honestly, I've just had the most luck if I Google or if I search MnDOT noxious weed handbook rather than trying to pour through their entire website to find it. But you can download that as a PDF and have it printed off. So you can do that. I don't really know if they make posters anymore. It's been a while since I've seen one, but I know that the Minnesota Department of Agriculture does have like brochures, handouts that they'll use. So I'm sure if you contacted Aimee there, she would maybe be able to mail you something or provide you with something.
I put the link to an 84-page PDF from MnDOT, Noxious Weeds, into the chat.
Oh, okay, thanks.
That dot.state Noxious Weeds PDF link. There's a question, let's see. What laws cover us entering private property? And then there's a question over here. Again, Bill Schneider writes, if we believe weeds are present. I know you can stand in the right of way and take pictures, or you can go into that if you want, Aimee.
Yeah, within the noxious weed law, it does say that, I guess I'd have to look to see if it's local weed inspector or county ag inspectors can enter property for noxious weed infestations. It's not a part of the law that we like to use. Typically, like I said, we want that first contact to be, friendly, respectful. And everyone's going to get angry if you all of a sudden, go walk on their property without them knowing, especially when you're looking for weeds. So it's not a part of the law that we really try to use very often. Personally, I've never used it. And one of the weed scientists, Tony Cordelay with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, he described it in a good way, where yes, it's written in the law, but if we ever actually had to use it and it got into the news or the media, that part of the law would be ripped out of there so quickly your head would spin. So I also kind of tell my townships, I'm not necessarily going to go hog wild over the thistles that are in someone's back 40 that you can't even see from the road, because I guess I don't know. It's just not a battle that I really want to get into. Kind of got to pick your battles with these infestations. So I guess that kind of sums that up, I guess, from my experience. If you want more information, if you feel like you need to go to that step, I would contact Aimee Duchene with the Minnesota Department of Agriculture.
Someone else, Tammy here, tells us about an app called Picture This.
Oh, great.
An app for, snapping a photo of the thing in front of you, and then the app tells you what it might be.
Yeah, that's a great resource. I'm old school. I use plan books and a website every now and again. But I know some of my townships have done a pretty good job with those apps on their phone.
One more question here. Can we get a copy of this presentation? If you send it to me as a PowerPoint or a PDF, then I'll put it on the MAT website. Would that work, Aimee?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I will send you an email, Aimee. That's mine. Okay, that's me. Any other questions? Otherwise, we can take a couple-minute break, and then thank you so much for presenting to us.
Yeah, no problem. You guys have a great day.
Yep. Bye. We can just stay on the call. It's going to be the same link all morning.